There are so many people who will argue that sex is unchangeable, biological fact, that no matter what you do, you will always be what you were. But the science really shows something different. Okay, I talked about this on TikTok this week, but it's still blowing my mind. So I thought I'd bring it here. I have been looking at these two different studies that show people assigned female at birth who have been on long-term testosterone grow prostate tissue. And yes, this will be a not safe for work video. We'll be getting into some very grown folks topics and ideas, just as a heads up. So the two studies I've been looking at are Anderson et al. In 2020 and then Chu et al. In 2022. Both of these studies were looking at samples taken from AFAB folks on long-term testosterone, namely trans men, trans masculine people who were having bottom surgery. And as part of that surgery, they had some of their bodily tissue removed. You can imagine from where. And that is the tissue that was studied. So the prostate tissue that we're talking about here is not like it's growing where a cis man's prostate would be. It's not even really visible. This is on like a microscopic level. So let's get into the details of these studies. The Anderson study from 2020 looked at 13 individuals. It was a mix of trans masculine people and intersex folks. The 8 trans masks in the study were on long-term testosterone, and 7 of them, so the vast majority, had prostatic glandular proliferation. Scientists in this study described this phenomenon as androgen-associated prostatic metaplasia. So prostatic meaning like prostate, and metaplasia is basically like cell growth in an area that it's unexpected or like normally wouldn't be. That's my understanding. I'm not a scientist in this way, right? I'm a social scientist, so please take everything with a grain of salt and read the studies yourself. The Chu 2022 study actually looked at 21 individuals, all of whom were assigned female at birth. All of them had been on T for at least a year, and the average amount of time was about 4.5 years on testosterone. And in that study, all of the specimens had demonstrated prostate type tissue on the microscopic level. 100% also had prostate-specific antigen, or PSA, which is something usually used to screen for cancer. Like, it wasn't cancerous material. They had this antigen. The study also looked at a control group and found that in the control group, the non-trans group, there was no evidence of prostatic metaplasia. So this does seem to be a result from testosterone. So what does this really mean? First of all, do not freak out. This is not a big cause for concern. It just is something that requires further investigation. This is really an understudied topic. And the researchers do suggest that patients seeking gender-affirming care in terms of hormones or surgery should be made aware of this potential outcome and the fact that we don't really know the risks involved in that. And I have a lot of questions. As a trans person myself who's been on T for over a decade, I wonder, how does this impact a person's feeling in their body? Does this change any type of sensation? Could it add pain? Could it add pleasure? Does it impact things like potential cysts or atrophy? What other parts of our bodies are changed on hormones that we don't even know about? At very least, doctors with trans masculine patients should be aware that long-term testosterone impacts PSA levels and keep that in mind when doing routine screening. You know, it really demonstrates why it's so important for us to be researching the impacts of transition. There is so much fear-mongering about how we don't know the full impact of long-term hormone use, and it could lead to infertility, it could lead to all this. Which is also not true. That fertility thing has been debunked. Like, trans men absolutely can be fertile if they go off testosterone. I know trans guys on T who've gotten pregnant, okay? But there is a lot we don't know. And there are a lot of people who use that gap in our knowledge as a way to try to restrict access to gender-affirming care, to say that it's just not safe enough, that we just don't know enough, and that we should stop it altogether. What I find interesting is those same people are rarely the ones advocating for money to go to research on that topic, but instead they just want to stop it entirely. And this is the thing about trying to just completely restrict access to healthcare. The more you try to legislate it out of existence, the more people just start accessing it in more dangerous and unregulated, unmonitored ways. Just like we've seen with reproductive healthcare and abortion. People don't stop getting abortions, they stop getting safe abortions. Personally, I consider sex and gender both to be social constructs, in the sense that they are terms we have created to try to describe and understand a very complicated aspect of our existence. I also recognize gender and sex have very physical realities, and I'm not here to deny the existence of either. As a trans person myself, I feel very strongly that my gender identity is reflected physically in me. I'm also very aware that the term is transsexual for a reason. The medical work that I have done on my body has absolutely altered my sex. And I say that with the understanding of sex as a multi-layered term. Sex is assigned at birth. frequently by visual assessment. That visual assessment can be inaccurate, as is often the case with intersex people. Sex is also a legal construct, something that actually can be changed. Where I live, I changed my legal sex from F to M. And in some places, you can even change it to X. Sex is embodied by our primary sex characteristics, which are alterable through things like surgery, or apparently, according to these studies, potentially hormone use. Sex is also demonstrated by our secondary sex characteristics, things like my beard or people's breast tissue, which again are alterable with hormones and surgery. And the one thing people really like to get stuck on is chromosomes, because chromosomes, yes, are not alterable, but they are also very rarely tested. There are very few occasions when you would need a chromosome test. I would bet that you watching this video do not know your chromosomes. It is reasonable to assume that my chromosomes are XX. It does not make or break my day-to-day life. I accept that as somebody who has transitioned my sex, there are elements like my chromosomes that will never change, and there are many more elements that are much more relevant to my daily life that I have changed, and I'm very happy with the changes I've achieved. It's not that sex doesn't exist or doesn't matter, but that there will always be edge cases and gray zones. You know, I have this bench in the front hall of my home. I love this thing. It's made of this gorgeous old wood. It has some storage on the inside. I use it every single day. When I bought it from the thrift store, I found out that it actually used to be a bed frame, but I don't think of it as a bed frame. I don't use it as a bed frame. I don't interact with it as a bed frame. When I have somebody come over, I don't go, hey, sit on the bench. They sit down to take off their shoes and they go, ha, it's actually a bed frame. It's more of an interesting footnote in the history of the bench, right? It also used to be a tree, but apparently nobody wants to talk about that, which I guess is woke carpentry for you. But this is my point. Things can and do change. People can and do change. It doesn't change what they used to be. And in fact, it becomes part of who they are now and who they will become. And we call ourselves trans because we understand that we are embodying a transition from one place to another. All that is to say, I hope you found these studies as interesting as I did. I had a great time reading them, and I will definitely be looking for more research on this topic. I'd love to hear your thoughts and insights on this, any other research you think I should read, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.